Welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to have you here with us tonight. We are happy to have this first event called Pass the Baton, Resident to Resident Advice for Excelling During Internship. We'd like to start off with sharing a little bit of information about the Latino Surgical Society. Our organization was founded by 4 friends, residents just like you are now. Dr. Joseph Fernandez More, Dr. Guesa Ortega, Dr. Joseph Lopez, and myself were all residents when we first thought about establishing a network for Latino surgeons. After a lot of work, the Latino Surgical Society was established to cultivate, nurture, and support the advancement of Latino surgeons. We'd really like to encourage you to consider joining us so that we can move forward and create a more diverse and representative field. And with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and turn the event over to our speakers, and I'm going to introduce our moderators. Dr. Munir Buhaya is a categorical surgery intern at the University of Texas Southwestern in Dallas, Texas. He graduated from McGovern Medical School at UT Health with scholarly distinction in medical humanities. He obtained his baccalaureate in microbiology from the University of Texas, El Paso in 2015, prior to completing a research fellowship at the NIH. He is passionate about surgical education and research and the advancement of underrepresented minorities in surgery. He is past regional co-director of the Latino Medical Student Association Southwest, and he is currently a resident member of the Latino Surgical Society. He grew up in El Paso, Texas, and Juarez, Mexico border region. Welcome, Dr. Buhaya.
Thank you, thank you.
We also have Dr. Haidi Malavé. She's originally from Newark, New Jersey. She first experienced the West Coast at Stanford University, where she studied biomedical engineering. She went to medical school at Columbia University. She's excited to be back out west and experiencing the beauty of the Pacific Northwest. She is a resident at the University of Washington in Seattle. She's excited to be providing patient-centered healthcare to continue to be an advocate for those who are historically underserved in medicine. As a personal note, she loves to try new things, exploring new places. And for that, this Jersey girl, that's enough to keep her busy. So welcome, Dr. Malavé. And with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and turn the programming over to you.
Perfect. Bueno, bienvenidos. Welcome to one of the very first LSS events geared towards surgical trainees. We're very excited about this event, talking about intern year. Dr. Malavé and myself being an interns right now, a little bit past 1 month and still here and going. During this event, we'll hear from current Latinx surgical residents, amazing people who are in their 2nd year now of training at various programs across the states. And so we're gonna hear about their internship experience and how they excel during this very hard year, I would say. We hope that the current and prospective surgical trainees benefit from this wisdom pearls that they're gonna share today. And we'll move forward with the introductions for panelists.
Awesome. Really excited to be here. I'm also excited to learn myself how to excel during intern year. On this panel, we're honored to have a few people. We'll start with Dr. Lorena Garcia. She's a PGY2 at Harbor UCLA, and she's working alongside her mentors to increase diversity within surgery. She obtained her medical degree from the University of California, Davis School of Medicine, where she was part of the San Joaquin Valley Prime, and that's a program dedicated towards increasing the access to healthcare within the Central Valley. She attended Duke University for her undergraduate studies, where she majored in sociology and global health with a minor in chemistry. There, she also participated in extracurricular activities to advocate for minorities in healthcare, women's legal rights, and ESL within Durham County. She's interested in burns and trauma surgery, and she loves helping patients in the operating room, in addition to addressing the psychosocial aspects of these. She was born in California's Central Valley, and she's a proud daughter of 2 Mexican immigrants. In her spare time, she enjoys spending time with her younger sister, her loving parents, and significant others. And she also enjoys spending time at the beach, riding her Peloton, and hanging out with her dog.
Yeah, spending time at the beach must be nice, Lorena. So next, let's introduce Dr. Jorge Zarate. He's a surgical resident at Barnes Jewish Hospital at Washington University in St. Louis, where he also did his medical school. He is currently a research fellow in the section of hepatobiliary and pancreatic and gastrointestinal surgery, with a particular interest in studying race and gender disparities in clinical outcomes after pancreatic surgery. He is passionate about surgical education, mentorship, and the advancement of underrepresented minorities in surgery. He is originally from Mexico, a paisa, and has been actively involved in LMSA at the local, regional, and national level. Welcome, Dr. Zarate.
Happy to be here.
Next, I'd like to welcome Dr. Angel Rosario, and I know him from Columbia. He was one of the incoming interns when I was a sub-I on my surgical rotation. And he's currently a second year in general surgery at New York Presbyterian Columbia. He received his medical degree from the University of California, San Francisco, Prime, US, where he focused on caring for underserved communities. He received his MPH degree in health management from Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, and he was a Zuckerman Fellow at Harvard Center for Public Leadership. He attended SUNY University of Buffalo for his undergraduate studies, focusing on psychology and biomedical sciences. Prior to medical school, he worked with Altamed Health Services, the country's largest FQHC, in the implementation of routine HIV screens across the Los Angeles area. His areas of interest include mentorship, healthcare administration, surgery, and the elimination of health disparities. He's a first generation, first to college, Dominican American from Harlem, New York City.
Welcome, Dr. Rosario. Any relation to the Los Hermanos Rosario? No? Welcome, welcome. Next, let's introduce Dr. Victoria Valdez. She's a surgery resident at Lahey Hospital and Medical Center in Burlington, Massachusetts. She went to the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley, 956, let's go, for undergrad in class of 2016, and obtained her medical degree from Baylor College of Medicine in Houston. She earned the award for excellence in medical student teaching during her intern year, and is the medical student liaison for the surgical clerkship at Lahey for Tufts Medical School. Welcome, Dr. Valdez.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And next up, we have Dr. Gabriela Abril. She's a categorical intern at New York Presbyterian-Brooklyn Methodist Hospital in Brooklyn, New York. She completed a prelim year of surgical residency at the University of Maryland Medical Center, and she obtained her medical degree from the University of Maryland Medical School of Medicine. She moved at the age of 17 to Chicago, Illinois, with a dream of becoming a surgeon. She completed the first 2 years of undergraduate education at Oakton Community College and then transferred to Johns Hopkins University, where she completed her bachelor's degree in cellular and molecular neuroscience. She was born in Nagoya, Japan, and grew up in Bogota, Colombia. Welcome.
All right, before we get started with questioning our panelists and getting all their wisdom, just kind of like overall how this is going to work. We're going to break it down into sections, kind of like 2 or 3 questions per section. Really, it's open for the panelists to start answering the questions as you wish. Please try to keep your answers concise. And for the attendees, I would encourage you to use the Q&A box. Please ask your questions, your follow-up questions there, and their panelists, once they're done speaking, they can all answer them live, either text or reply back. We also, at the end, we're going to have a live Q&A where you can raise your hand or write it up there. We'll call you and you can actually ask that question live. So without further ado, let's get this going with the first section. So I think that every one of our experiences are in great part shaped by expectations, right? These can either originate from previous experiences, or they can be like shared from others' experiences or their presumptions of what's going to happen. And so with this in mind, the next couple of questions are going to actually explore, really open to any of the panelists to answer this question. So before starting residency, what were your expectations about intern year, and how did this change after you kind of like finished it or progressed?
I think for me, I went in thinking that intern year was going to be like one of the hardest years. No one kind of painted like a glorified picture of what it could be. And honestly, I think it I think I had like a worse view of what intern year would be. I was really worried. I moved halfway across the country. I didn't know anybody over here. I thought that I'd be completely isolated. I think one thing for me was I got really lucky in my program. Everyone there was super supportive. My co-interns, my co-residents, they're like family to me now. And so that really helped. And that's not what I expected at all. I expected like a bunch of gunners and like, you know, that like not being able to function. But I think that was probably the most surprising for me. And then, you know, it's just hard. The intern year is hard wherever you go. It's just hard.
I had the opposite experience. I stayed at my institution where I went to medical school for residency. So I think what was challenging for me was, I guess, like breaking out of that kind of med student box. I had met all the people in my program already, all the faculty, the PD, the current residents as a medical student. So I think the challenge for me was, stepping, out of that kind of med student role that I had originally met everybody in, and trying to get them to see me, as an intern, right? As a more responsible, somebody who has a little bit more autonomy and decision-making power. And I think that was something that I actually had to struggle with throughout intern year, mostly because I think that the way that I was presenting made people treat me like a medical student still. So it was about gaining the self-confidence that I had enough knowledge and skill to make decisions so that people would trust me to start making decisions in the first place.
I think for me, I initially thought that I was going to have to know absolutely everything in that there was to know about medicine or about surgery. And so the expectations that I thought that others, faculty members and more senior residents had of us as interns was way much higher in my head than it actually wound up being in practice. I think that was great. That's of course my experience in my program. But I think what that allowed me to do was relieve some of the anxiety that I had. And I think tied to that, which was very interesting and surprising, was also the relationship with attendings and with faculty was drastically transformed, I think, when compared to my experience as a medical student. So the relationships felt much more like colleague, much more like mentorship than it did like instructor or professor.
Dr. Zarate, did that happen to you where maybe it was more in your head that they perceived you as a med student, and now as you kind of develop those relationships with your attendings and your colleagues and the peers as an intern, you started seeing that was more in your head than what was happening?
Yeah, I think, one of the other questions that we're going to be talking about later is, what was your lowest point in intern year? And I think that one of my lower points was when I got kind of a little bit of a tough love from one of the chiefs. She told, Dr. Lauren Barron, she's one of the CT fellows at Washington now. She's one of the best chiefs I've had. And she told me very early into my trauma rotation, you're not a medical student anymore. So you need to stop acting like a medical student. Don't report information, but use the information, make a decision, and then present your decision and your reasoning for that decision to your superior, to your upper levels, right? Like that's the role of an intern. Nobody is expecting you to single-handedly take care of a patient, but they're expecting you to process the information and then make a decision based on that, and then propose a plan, as opposed to as a medical student where really it's about teasing apart information for what's important and what's not important, right? It's about presenting the patient. As an intern, you're supposed to go a step beyond that and use the information to make a decision. And I think that I didn't, struggled making that distinction. And once I trusted myself to be able to make plans and be comfortable with the idea that I was not always going to be right, I think that's when people started treating me more like a physician, because I started seeing myself more as a physician.
I think I had a similar experience in that I expected to come in and one day feel like I was finally a doctor, where I didn't actually feel like I was a doctor at all. It just, you end up growing into that role eventually. And suddenly at some point you realize that maybe you do feel like a doctor. But we'll talk about like lowest moments, as Dr. Zarate said, later. And I think the learning curve was a lot steeper than I expected it to be. It was steep every day, every single day. You knew more than the day before. And even though I expected intern year to be very hard, I didn't expect the end of intern year to be so vertical from the beginning of intern year.
I guess just a follow-up question about the steepest part of your learning curve. How did you, I guess it was not that steep all the time. I assume that there were moments where it was steepest than others, but how did you overcome those parts that were more challenging?
I can start with that question. So one of my chiefs, when I was a trauma intern as well, his name is Dr. Sugiyama, and now he's doing trauma actually at Baylor. But what he started off is like, he told me like very early on in the OR, I expect you to mess up. I expect you to do things that then I'm supposed to fix. And that's completely normal. If you don't mess up, then you're not learning. But then he told me, but I expect that after every time you mess up, you'll go home and you'll think about like what you did and how you could have not done that and how you're going to do it differently next time. And I think that's one thing that really stuck with me. And even now, like every time, whether it's in the OR versus clinical, when I do something or I miss something, I like go over to my head, I'm driving home or I'm waking up post-con, I think about like, why did I do that? Or what were the signs early on that I should have not missed that? And I think just reminding yourself to practice that small little exercise has made a difference, at least for me.
Yeah, I would agree 100%. One of my attendings told me, you know, if you already knew how to operate, you wouldn't need to be, and you wouldn't have to do intern year. So I think that, you know, like I said, everybody says, you know, anticipates that you're not going to know what you're doing, and that's why you're there. You're there to learn. But I think, you know, like Dr. Garcia was saying, it's important that you're not just making the same mistakes over and over, but that you're kind of being thoughtful about, you know, trying to actually learn from each mistake. I think part of that is also learning to be comfortable with, you know, the ambiguity. I think a lot of things, especially earlier on in your training, there's going to be a lot of ambiguity and the answers are not going to be very clear cut. You're going to be alone at night and you're going to have to make decisions with limited information. So, you know, I think that being sort of a little bit kind to yourself with the fact that you're doing your best, I think also is part of the learning curve. I think kind of like I alluded to earlier, I think I was very uncomfortable with making decisions with incomplete information or not really knowing 100% that I was, you know, being confident in my own decisions. And I think that was a big hurdle for me to overcome. And once I was able to sort of conceptualize that and be kind of kind to myself, and, you know, I think intern year went a lot better.
And I think you guys have been sort of alluding to some of the challenges that come with intern year, that the challenges of becoming a doctor. I myself had to stop saying like, I'm Haidi. I was, oh, sorry, Dr. Malavé, my bad. So I'm curious, you know, with these new experiences come these greater responsibilities. And now you have patients that are relying on you directly to care for them. And while that can be really gratifying, especially when you have good outcomes, we all know that not all outcomes are good outcomes, and some of that can have an emotional toll on us, as well as the physical toll that we have from such a heavy workload. I'm just curious if you guys can talk about maybe one of your highest and lowest moments of intern year.
I think that was what you're talking about, like feeling like you don't know what to do or how to manage a situation, and then putting blame on yourself for doing the wrong thing, because you're going to do wrong things, and then remembering that you're not the sole person of a team most of the time. Sure, your senior may be in the OR and your junior may be seeing consults, depending on the way that your residency is set up, but you're never alone. With that being said, like, I guess the hardest part was for me initially, not being too emotional over those mistakes that I had, because I felt very kind of like what Dr. Garcia was saying, going home and kind of like thinking over and over again about how I can be better. And I think that really helped me go through like my calls and go through my other rotations to not make the same mistakes. But there came a point in residency where it just almost became a little bit pervasive. And I think by like month 3 or 4, I could tell like I was like losing a lot of weight, like not intentionally. I wasn't like eating right. I wasn't drinking enough water. I wasn't going to the bathroom because I was so focused. Like every time I closed my eyes, I could see the green light of my green pager. And it's not something I'm like proud to talk about because it definitely traumatized me the first like 3 months of residency. But then taking a breath and like kind of stepping back and realizing like you're not the biggest hole in the Swiss cheese model. Like that's why we have a bunch of people on the team. And then just feeling comfortable at just asking for help. And so I think my lowest moment was, you know, very early in residency where I just felt like I either wasn't doing anything right, or when I was doing something right, I just kept focusing on the one thing that I might have done wrong, even though I probably did a lot of things wrong. And then I think towards the end, when things kind of get back together and I think the highest moment for me was personally like going to my program director for our end of the year meeting and just hearing the words like, you did a good job, just like having that external validation that some of the hard work that you did was worth it, really like made the world a difference to me. And so I think that's also important to realize that, you know, surrounding yourself by people that are gonna validate you is gonna be really helpful in residency.
Dr. Valdez, I can relate very much to everything you just said. I think that I think we think about like, oh, what was the lowest point of intern year? But I feel like it came in these like ups and lows, and I had multiple of those lows like every few months. But it is traumatizing because you look back and you think like, oh my God, I remember like going to the hospital, it's like you're the first one there and the last one to leave. And like, it's like 4 or 5 p.m. and you know, you're still not done with all your work. And there's just so much to do. And you know that like so-and-so staples are not going to come out and so-and-so sutures aren't going to come out unless you go do them. And then you're thinking in your head, like, I got to go take this out. But then if I would see the patient, I actually have to talk to the patient. So that's going to take a while. But then you feel guilty, like having these thoughts in your head. But that's really what happens, because then you start thinking, God, I'm not going to make it home to dinner. Like, I'm so hungry. I don't know what to do. And it's just all these thoughts go into your head. And you just feel like disappointed because you think to yourself, I went into medicine or I went into surgery because I want to help these people. And I'm having these thoughts that, God, now I got to go talk to the patient, or now I got to go do this. And it's like, it kind of like it, during the moment, you just want to go home and you want to get everything done. But then you get home and you're like, God, I should have just talked a little extra to the patient, or I should have just like not even complain about going to talk to so-and-so's family this late at night. It's just those little thoughts that you have that you regret after. But during the moment, you just like don't even know what to do anymore because you don't have any more time for yourself. And I feel like those times came by every so-and-so weeks. And it's like a little embarrassing to say it out loud, but I think those are the times where I felt like, God, I'm like so embarrassed of myself. I hate that I think this way. And those were the lows.
I'm glad I'm not alone. Oh my God.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I meant about learning to be kind of, kind to yourself. I think that we're all doing the best that we can. We're a limited resource and the need is infinite. And so you kind of try to get as much done as you can and, try harder the next day. If I'm being completely honest, I think that I didn't feel really good about intern year until after intern year was done. I think when I transitioned into second year, which is at least on my program, like when you play the role of consults resident, it wasn't until I was a consults resident and I, would go see consults and then realize that I had learned a lot during intern year, that I, was now somebody who could make decisions about surgical plans and had opinions about whether to do X or Y, and that I could present those to my attendings, and create a relatively intelligent, reasoning as to why I wanted to do one thing versus the other, that I was like, wow, okay, I felt like I was kind of like faking it through intern year and just kind of like, that I kind of hobbled over the finish line. But, looking back, I guess I should have trusted the system, and you kind of like learn what you need to learn, even though it feels like you're just kind of like rolling with the punches, which you are, but that's how we learn.
For sure. I'm already struggling with some of these things. And I think another thing that maybe some of you guys have struggled with, so certainly in surgery and in the space that it's in, you know, being brown, being Hispanic, in general, have you guys had to deal with issues of impostership and feelings of impostership, and maybe how you overcame those feelings?
Every day. I think, sorry, my headphones ran out of battery. I think really every day, I think this question relates a lot to the one before that. I think intern year for me started kind of where you're semi-confident of something, and then it drastically drops where you realize you don't know anything, and then you realize what you actually don't know, and you hit a low kind of at like month 2 or 3, and then you stay low for weeks after that, and maybe you don't, I felt much dumber than I did at the beginning of the year. And I was like, wow, I think I knew a lot more a few months ago. And what got me through those moments was actually the fact that I voiced it out to a few co-residents, and everyone felt the same way. And I was like, okay, maybe I'm not messing up this much. And then that entire low was a constant imposter syndrome. It was a constant, everyone is learning, everyone is like doing something, and they all look better. And I looked at my co-residents, and they all were more confident and had maybe we're a little more able to make plans. And I was like, I think I'm faking this. Like, I'm not really sure if I'm doing it right. And then suddenly it gets a little better, but I don't think you realize how better it gets until you get to the next year, as everyone else was saying. But I think, yeah, I think relying on other people and voicing it and realizing that maybe everyone else feels the same way made it a little better.
Yeah, I completely agree with Dr. Abril. For me, imposter syndrome is something that is definitely has just really never gone away. I think at this point, in just thinking about my academic, career, and now entering my professional career, it's just, I think it's an indefinite ongoing issue that will probably always be there. And I think the coping mechanisms and the strategies around how to deal with those emotions maybe develop as years go by. But it is certainly something that has been a present issue, was a present issue for me during intern year, as it is now in this next phase as a second year. I will say, this kind of ties to the last question about lowest moments. I think for me, my ab site was one of the lowest moments for me. I was like barely trying to just make it through in terms of just the work that I had to do during the day. And I wasn't studying as aggressively as I could have been. And I think that impacted how I felt about myself clinically, which facilitated even a stronger sense of this imposter syndrome. But I will say that one of the things that I was very intentional about when I was thinking about residencies, and I'm very grateful that I am where I am, is working with Latinx communities of color, was very important to me as a buffer to the imposter syndrome, because there have been plenty of, I can't even say how many times I feel like absolute crap, and then I'm taking care of a Dominican patient, of a Colombian patient, of a Black patient who grew up in the same neighborhood as me, and them vocalizing, "We're so proud of you." I mean, those are the sorts of moments that they're like heart-wrenching, they like are so overwhelmingly positive that they have this potential to snap you out of moments where you feel like, what is my purpose here? Do I deserve to be here? What is my role? Was it a fluke that I made it here? So those moments, tapping into those moments of validation when things are going right is a great way to buffer these very powerful imposter syndrome feelings.
Hey, thank you, Dr. Rosario. You guys are amazing. You're just like having this flow beautifully. Actually, moving to the next section, which touched upon those points on caring for the Latino patients. It was very important for me to be in an institution, in a program that cares for underserved populations. And so at Parkland Hospital here is one of the largest safety net hospitals in the States. well, 50% of the patient population is composed of Hispanics. And, you know, it's truly very gratifying to care for the underserved, especially for the Latinos. And I don't know exactly what the demographics at your institutions and your hospitals are, but I would like to know about how's your experience being a provider in caring for Latinx patients? How do you think this identity of yours shapes your experience as a doctor?
I can go first. I guess Lahey, Burlington doesn't typically have a lot of diversity in its patients. And that was something important to me when I was picking a residency program. I didn't want to lose my Spanish. I didn't want to lose my connection to that culture. But I'm here and I'm really happy. I think that there's people that need help in all different situations. So actually, Lahey is one of the #1 geriatric trauma centers in the country, or one of the top geriatric trauma centers in the country. So I feel like that to be able to provide some sort of care to that area of people has been really great. Occasionally we get Spanish-speaking individuals that come in. Most of them are on the trauma acute care service, and I'll get to use my Spanish, and to be able to use my Spanish with them and them to smile, and then just to feel like they're being heard without using a translator. Of course, my Spanish is really broken and I have to use a translator, but I start introducing myself in Spanish, and, you know, being able to do that for them just makes me feel really warm inside.
I think I've experienced both really good things about taking care of Latino patients, and then difficulties that I've encountered as well, taking care of Latino patients as a Latina doctor. As actually very recently, I'm not really sure if this happens to everyone, but we tend to talk a lot. Like Hispanic patients want to talk. They find you speak Spanish, and they want to tell you how their night was and how the date was. And in surgery, that can be very difficult because you're running around in morning rounds and everyone's going really, really fast. And I think it's very hard to translate that to your team in general. Sometimes when you're like, sometimes maybe it's important to take a second and listen to this patient that maybe just needs a little more time, because the culture sometimes just is like that. It's a little more long in the way that they relate, and they sometimes feel abandoned when you leave the room. And so as an intern, you would just leave behind and just kind of try to talk to them and then just run out. I think those were difficult things. And I think part of the question that we were sent was how we're changing the way that our maybe co-residents go about taking care of Latino patients. And then maybe sometimes saying, oh, well, this patient wants to know this, or sometimes even when I'm translating, I literally flat out translate what the patient says. What they say, oh, God bless you at the end of the conversation. And maybe people start realizing that it's just a little more cultural. Those have been little changes that I think are necessary, that are different in our culture than I think other people.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go for it, Dr. Zarate.
Oh, I was just going to say, in Missouri, it's a little bit of a different situation where the Latino community is actually much smaller than, in the other panelists who, live in Texas. And so I think, my experience with, Latinx patients is a little bit different because it's just much fewer of us. So it's a little bit, it's sort of like whenever we run into each other in the hospital, it's sort of like a very kind of sweet moment of kind of acknowledgement that, we're both kind of in this space that is not really built for us. And, I think kind of like an understanding that the struggles, the struggles that come with being, a minority in, a majority white space, or even, St. Louis is almost 50% white, 50% Black. So, anybody who, any other racial minorities are, the populations are quite small. So there's also just that kind of kinship with patients that I think puts patients at ease, which is, why we need to diversify medicine in the first place.
Yeah, I will say where I am, every single day is a different experience with Latino patients. It's a predominantly, I'm in New York City, but it's predominantly Dominican in my neighborhood. But we're literally taking care of people from all sorts of backgrounds, so many different shades of Latino. And to be quite honest, I mean, the thing that it validates for me is just how critical it is for us to be present in the system, because I find myself doing an enormous amount of advocacy that actually I learned I have just so many examples of how the advocacy winds up infiltrating clinical decision making. And it's then the clinical decision making and choices to do X for someone or to do Y for someone or to not do X or Y for someone that, in my opinion, winds up leading to the health disparities that we see. And so, you know, it's just scary for me to think about all the ways in which biases potentially infiltrate clinical decision making and then lead to different health outcomes. I unfortunately have plenty of examples of that in my head, but small ways in which my identity as a Latinx person, as an LGBTQ, first generation Latinx person, provides me a lens and an understanding of what a patient might potentially be feeling or going through, or their families might be feeling and going through. And then, and having a conversation with that, confirming kind of that perspective and that lens, and then bringing it back to my teams to then make decisions as to, how it is best to manage someone's care. I mean, it's scary to think that, a lot of patients across the country don't have, providers who may even have just a glimpse of the lens of what that experience might be like, so that then we can advocate for them. So it's just been it's been a very unique and powerful and needed experiences caring for Latinx and other marginalized communities.
For me, it's only been 6 weeks since I started, and at least 3 or 4 patients have tell me, "Oh, your parents must be really proud of you." So that felt nice. That felt nice because they share that they're also proud of having a someone who looks like them, who speaks their language, caring for them and making it. And so that's just a little energy boost for me, and that keeps me going for sure.
Dr. Rosario, just you speaking about Colombia makes me miss my Dominican people a little more. I'm also Dominican, and there are not many Dominicans in Seattle, so that's been an interesting transition for me in terms of wellness, which is my slight transition. I have gotten some recommendations on where to get platanos, so TBD. But in other aspects of wellness, we know it's essential for us to have wellness, and especially with our high performing professional lives and trying to reduce and prevent burnout. But we also know that in our free time, we're also expected to do some studying for the app site. And at the end of the day, we have a limited amount of time. So I'm curious if we can start off a little bit with what you guys do in your free time, but maybe what you do for wellness first.
Other than going to the beach, Dr. Garcia.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like when I started off, it's definitely in medical school, wellness. So wellness in medical school is very different than wellness in residency, because you just don't have much time. I was even talking to a medical student this morning, and I was telling him, I feel like in residency, I have a little bit of money, but I just never have time to go do anything with it. And then also depending on what rotation you're on and how many hours you're working, you're working days or nights, wellness has been very different for me. So I range from going on a daily trip or going to the beach, spending a day at the beach, or just hanging out in the day, shopping, doing things like that in the city, versus just coming home and just laying on my couch with a glass of wine. And that can be wine. I mean, that can be wellness for that day. It just really depends how I feel. And then even sometimes I feel like all my energy is sucked in the hospital and at work and being super cheerful and talking to people, that when I get home, I just want to be by myself. And sometimes that's wellness as well. So I think starting to learn this new side of me, I guess, within residency, where it's like knowing where I've had like enough social things for a day or for the week, and when I need just time for myself. I think that has been like super important in trying to navigate my own wellness. But yeah, doing things like hanging out by myself on the couch, or like I mentioned earlier, riding my Peloton, and even seeing my family when I can. They're nearby, but it's still like a 2-hour drive. And within that, we all know like there's not always time to drive 2 hours there and 2 hours back. It just gets really hard. So trying to navigate mostly like when I do what has also been a little difficult.
I think wellness is very difficult intern year. And I think it starts with forgiving yourself, because a lot of the times you take too much into your plate, or like Dr. Valdez was saying, you felt like you were the biggest hole in the Swiss cheese and like you were missing everything. And it was 10 p.m. and you were like, well, today sucked. And I think at the end of the day, maybe if you were a little forgiving with yourself, then you wouldn't feel as bad. And I think when I started being a little less hard on myself is when I found time to do something else, like actually enjoy time with my dogs when I got home, and be present and not necessarily be with my mind in the hospital all the time, which I still do, unfortunately. I think it's a learning process. I feel a little strange talking about wellness because I don't think I've managed that balance just yet. I think I still have a lot to learn. I'm still struggling with finding what wellness means to me. I'm just trying to be a little forgiving of maybe not having enough time.
And I think that's a very fair statement to say. Thank you for sharing that, Abril. I think that it's a balance that we need to find. And I think as long as we have that present, I think that there's progress that's being made.
Then on the
Anyone
other
else?
side, yeah, I do expect that there is wellness, but I understand that with the limited time, also some of that time has to be spent studying for the app site. And I'm sure a lot of us are curious, because I haven't found time yet, how your studying habits might have been for the app site, what you've learned from that too.
I went into residency knowing that the app site was a big deal. I still didn't start to find time to study until about November, which might be very late because everyone starts recommending doing questions early. There's a lot of different resources depending on your program. You might be able to get things like SCORE or TrueLearn. A lot of people recommend just getting a book like Schwartz or Cameron's. I prefer Cameron's, and then just dedicating yourself to reading that textbook so you don't spread yourself too thin. But what I'm starting to do now, after I've made some mistakes in studying for AppSite last year, was, just doing 10 questions a day is better than no questions a day. And my dad, who's actually on this call, is in here, and his recommendation, and he sees that people do well on AppSite when you do as many questions as possible. So I actually ended up buying SCORE in addition to the TrueLearn that my program provides, and then just trying to get through all of TrueLearn, trying to do all your wrongs, and then trying to do as much of SCORE as possible. And that sounds really hard, and it really was. I got lucky. I was on night float, and it was in the middle of COVID, so there wasn't a lot of patients that I had to take care of. So I just sat down on night float and just did like question after question after question. Whenever you can fit in the time, I just do 10 questions here, 10 questions there.
Yeah, whenever I was on call, it's a little bit hard when you're an intern because the phone is always ringing, but I would, this is probably the same at your universities too, but I get access to a lot of the surgical textbooks online. So since I was going to, I always had up on the computer, like a chapter from something, and whenever I had a moment, I would try to read a little bit. I don't sleep very well when I'm on call anyway, and you're going to be woken up in 15 minutes anyway, so you might as well like get through a page. I actually thought that Greenfield was very good as an intern. I think Cameron's a little bit harder. The text is a little bit harder in my opinion. So I thought Greenfield was better as an intern. Savastan is also very good as an intern. I think they're more accessible, but I think that you could try, read a chapter from each of them and then see which one you like best. They all cover the same topics roughly. Score, I believe, is actually free. So I think that you can, you can do score questions. I agree that doing a couple questions every day is better than not doing questions at all. The data is very clear that the more questions you get done, the better your AppSite score is going to be. And obviously, I think that it's not just about doing questions, but about understanding why you got questions wrong. So I use Evernote, but you can use any kind of software app that allows you to write stuff. So I have organized my notes based on by organ systems, and I just, whenever I get a question wrong, I look at why I got it wrong, and then I write down the learning point from that question on the appropriate chapter. And that's allows you to reinforce it by, you read it and then you also type it, condense it and then you type it out. That's, what I sort of try to do for the AppSite as an intern, kind of failed, and then have been trying to get better at it ever since, but that's my strategy.
The other thing is don't reinvent the wheel. You guys are in medical school, you're graduating, you're going to have a medical degree in a few months if you haven't already gotten it. Do what works for you. If Anki or Anki, wherever you're from, works for you, then do that. If there's a bunch of resources online, Evernote's awesome, but don't reinvent the wheel. Try to do what works for you, and then stumble and make a few mistakes. I don't think you need to get that good of a score to be passing. So use this year to find out what works for you.
One thing that I've been doing, and this has actually been more recent, I'll share one thing that I was doing in intern year and then that I've continued doing, which is if I'm showering or something, I'll listen to Behind the Knife. I'll just put it in whatever episode. And even if I'm not necessarily picking up everything, it's more of just the initial exposure to it. It's kind of I use it to kind of just prime myself to get comfortable with information. And then more recently, what I've been doing is just realizing that kind of similar strategy to thinking of how to think about the questions is that, if you just literally read 5 pages a day, every day across the year, that's over 1,500 pages. That's almost one of the textbooks, So it's it really, you only need to do a little bit consistently and you get there. So finding just all the spaces where you can just read a little bit is helpful. And then the other thing that I've been doing more recently, which has been easier as a consult resident, I know every program is different around when you do consult, but if I've just been keeping a list of all the patients that I've seen and all of their kind of primary diagnoses, and then I'll, we work them up, whatever. But then when there's downtime, I actually study that specific diagnosis and the workup for that, so that it really ingrains a patient in my head who I help to diagnose with this supplemental reading that I'm doing on that specific condition. And I think that's been really helpful in really concreting ideas that sometimes when you're just randomly studying topics, just because you're I need to study, it's difficult to not have a schema to attach new information to, or a mental model to attach information to, if it doesn't necessarily feel relevant to you at that time.
I also just want to say that I met John McClellan. He's the Burn Fellow at UW. And I didn't realize until I heard the podcast, I was like, oh my God, it's the John McClellan. So that was my little fangirl moment. But I think at this time, we also just wanted to leave a little bit of time to see if anyone had any questions and maybe transition into the live Q&A portion. What do you think, Munir?
Yes, we encourage all attendees to ask your questions away. If not, we have a few saved specific to prelims, and if there are no questions in the next 5 seconds or so.
It looks like there's a question in the Q&A specifically about IMGs, which I think kind of feeds into this, it's a good segue to the prelim conversation.
There you go.
I was not a prelim, so take this with a grain of salt, but I think unfortunately most IMGs, the question is, what advice would you give to an IMG seeking general surgery residency? I don't know if you guys can see the questions or not, but and I think most IMGs enter residency as prelims. for better or for worse. And, you know, for those of you that don't know, prelim is basically like a year-long interview. And I would encourage you to, first of all, establish mentorship early. You're going to need a faculty person who's really going to, you know, go up, you know, bat for you at those rank meetings. And if you can get involved with research, that's a second faculty person who will be vouching for you. You know, and I think that you should be mindful of where you accept a prelim spot. You should talk to other prelims to try to figure out whether the program takes any of those prelims as categoricals or not. At WashU, for example, we've got a pretty good track record of keeping prelims as categoricals, but that's not the case at every program. And I think that you should be going into, if you accept a prelim spot, you should be going into that with realistic expectations of whether they're going to give you a categorical spot or whether you need to be hustling from day one to find a spot elsewhere.
Since there were questions regarding prelim, I just wanted to say something related to prelim year. I think if intern year is hard, prelim intern year is really, really hard. I think the entirety of the year, as Dr. Zarate was saying, is a long interview, and you feel like the entire year you're being scrutinized the entire time, whether it's true or not. You end up feeling like every mistake that you make is going to cost you your career. I think it's very important to find people that you can rely on, that you can talk about these issues, because it can get very, very hard as the year goes by. I think mentorship, as he was saying, is absolutely critical. I think one of the mistakes I made the first way around is not really branching out and finding someone that could necessarily help me get where I wanted to go. Having a vision of where you want to be, I think is important to share that with someone else, so that they can help you get there, because you feel like you don't have anyone else, but you do. You have a lot of people, and any one of us is happy to talk, even if you're just feeling like you're in the dead of intern year, and feeling like that. I think app site ends up being important for a prelim, because it can give you a little bit of a hump or a little bit of a bump when you're trying to apply for a categorical spot. So I think being forgiving with yourself, but holding yourself accountable is also very important. Everything is a balance. So if you couldn't do 10 questions today, maybe it's time to do 20 tomorrow. I think the entire time is going to be a balance between what you're doing and what you're not doing. If anyone has any more questions regarding intern year as a prelim, I'm happy to answer them here or separate chat as well.
There's only one other question in the chat that is not pertaining to intern year, but more about medical school and kind of like advice about that. I would actually like to encourage you all the attendees, to send us a direct message or send a direct message to LSS either through Twitter or Instagram or an email about what kind of topics you like to see in possible future events. So I guess very quickly, let's go around the circle and just share one piece of advice, quick piece of advice about medical school and how to excel in medical school. One sentence. Go for it.
Go into each rotation thinking like you want to do that rotation, even though you think ahead of time you don't want to do it, because that's what I did with surgery. I didn't want to do it, and now I'm here. So just keep your mind open to whatever opportunities you have.
Yeah, similar to that, I would say, I think that the medical student that we all remember when we're giving feedback to our, upper levels or our attendings or the program director is a medical student that was, early, the medical student that was ready to, work hard, and, the medical student that was prepared. So, read whenever you can, but also in surgery, for rounds, we're going to be looking at wounds. So carry dressing supplies. I think it's always excellent when the medical student has 4x4s or the little, Q-tips that we use to probe wounds. Like nobody ever carries those, and we always need them, or like staple remover tools. I think the medical student who's prepared is a medical student who's set up for success.
I would also like to add to that to establish mentors early on. If you think you may be interested in something, and even if you end up completely choosing something otherwise, it's very important to have a mentor because it can help you once you start getting ready for step studying. And then even just applying later. I thought I was going to go into pediatrics. I did like pediatric research, I had multiple pediatrics mentors, and they were all super helpful even when I transitioned into surgery. And then they helped me find other mentors in surgery. So just having someone that you can relay questions to, very, very important, even like as an MS1.
Similarly, I would say follow the vibes or the people who kind of make your heart sing or who inspire curiosity in you. Explore those areas and those people more.
My piece of advice would be talk to the patients. Time as you progress in your career is more limited, and you might not have all the time to talk to your patients, but as a med student, you have all the time. So just get to know them, their stories, they're really impactful.
And so my advice, and this is maybe imposter syndrome related, you belong there, you're smart, you're intelligent, you want to be like the acting intern, and don't be afraid to fail. So, you know, put your doctor suit on and be a doctor.
Well, we're almost out of time. Definitely 1 hour is not enough to get all your wisdom, but we're very thankful for all your time first and sharing about your experience as an intern. And like I said, please send us your suggestions for future events and be on the lookout for our following events, okay? Thank you very much for your time, everyone, and have a good night.